Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Alex and I today for Workplace Evolution, Critical HR Trends Defining 2025. My name is Kaylee Hansen. I'm the Marketing Campaigns Manager here at GoCo, and we are so grateful and so excited to have you all here today. A couple little housekeeping things before we get started. I will be sending out the recording and slides post-webinar, so make sure that you are on the lookout for that afterwards. And then additionally, at the very end of the webinar, I will be sharing the SHRM and HRCI codes, so stick around for those as well. And before we get started, before we logged on to this, Alex had a great intro question to ask the chat. So, how many of you feel like the pace of change in HR has accelerated in the past year? Why don't we think about that for a second? Put our thoughts in the chat, and if we think that the pace of HR has accelerated in the past year. Alex, I'm pretty sure I know your answer to this already, but what are
You
your
do.
thoughts?
I mean, mine would be heck yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like it's accelerated. It's accelerating every month, you know,
it's changing all the time. Anytime
all
I'm
the time.
putting together topics for webinars and educational content, it's just constantly
I
evolving
love it. At
and
least
changing.
the chat is proving true to form. Like, I'm glad I'm not alone.
Love it.
I thought we were holding steady after COVID, but definitely has with all these changes in AI. Yep. I agree with you, Sarah. I think that's why we constantly are like shape shifting and figuring out how we need to show up
Definitely.
um, next because it's constantly changing.
Definitely. Well, thank you all. We will be asking some reflection questions throughout the webinar, so feel free to keep putting your thoughts in chat. And then additionally, if you have any questions for Alex during the webinar, you can add them into the Q&A on Zoom, and we will either get to them if they make sense during the discussion, or we will save some time at the end for some questions. We already had a couple roll in before the webinar, so we are excited to get to that. And with that, Alex, are you okay if I pass it over to you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, first and foremost, just want to thank everyone for joining us today. I know also Kaylee is going to drop my LinkedIn into the chat so that if I know I recognize some names on here already, but for those of you that are not connected with me, I'd love to connect and continue the conversation beyond today as well. So, appreciate everyone taking the time today to come join and talk about workplace evolution, critical trends defining 2025. So excited to be partnering with GoCo on this. So really over the next hour or just shy of that at this point, we're going to really explore some critical trends reshaping HR and how forward-thinking organizations are really responding. So we'll probably spend about 45 minutes or so talking about this and then leave some time for a Q&A at the end. During the course of the session, I'm going to be proposing some reflection questions to help you relate these trends to your own organization. So when I do ask them, I just ask that you throw out your thoughts in the chat. I really want this to be an interactive session, just not me purely speaking. And then also, I know we've had some pre-submitted questions, so we'll have those during the Q&A at the end, as well as whatever live questions come up as well. So I definitely encourage you to use the chat function today because I think your perspectives are going to enrich our collective learning as well. So, all right, well, let's get going on this at this point. So, Kaylee, if you would mind going to the next slide. Okay, so I'd say first and foremost, we really need to set the stage for what is happening right now and the HR landscape that we're living in. It's constantly evolving, and I'm sure we have people from all over the place on this call. I'm sure many people in the U.S. As well as elsewhere. But the workplace transformation that began during the pandemic, as some people alluded to in the chat, has only accelerated. So, what we're experiencing today isn't just a temporary adjustment, but really a fundamental reshaping of how our work gets done. And I think there's five in particular major forces that are driving this transformation. So the first one I would say, and it's not going to come as a big surprise, there's no aha on the first one, but it's shifting economic conditions, that are continuing to create uncertainty. Things like the tariffs in the US is a good example right now, with organizations needing to really balance their growth ambitions with cost pressures and also changing market dynamics, right? And I think, for many that are looking and reflecting on the market right now, that's only going to continue to change and evolve as time goes on. I think the second one is technology transformation. A number of you put it in the chat. Right now, it's AI. I think we've only scratched the surface of AI. And who knows what's in the forefront, what's in the future us, we just don't know. And so we have to be braced for that. But I think that technology and AI is revolutionizing not just how we do work, but what work humans actually do versus what's automated or what's augmented. For some of you, you may have come across the comments from the company Shopify recently and its CEO, who basically has put an edict out to its employees to say, you know what, now to justify future headcount, you're going to have to tell us why AI can't do this. So it really has kind of flipped the script, so to speak, on how you look at headcount planning and headcount management as well. I think the third one really is around workforce demographics, which are continuing to evolve with, we have 5 generations in the workplace right now. They will have very different needs and expectations. And, we are trying to juggle and balance how we can try and get to the majority of those and those needs. Like, we're not going to be able to do it 100% of the time. My rule of thumb always is when you put a people strategy together, if it kind of meets 80 to 90% of the employee population, you've done a really freaking good job. But we can't be everything to everyone either. A fourth one, and not my favorite, but one that's necessary to highlight and talk about, is regulatory complexity is increasing globally. So there's new laws around everything from data privacy to pay transparency, you name it, something's coming out all the time, and we're having to keep top of mind in terms of how that's going to affect our day-to-day within the workplace as well. And then fifth, sort of last but not least, are just employee expectations. They've fundamentally changed, particularly around the ideas of flexibility, purpose, and the employee experience. I know for myself, when I think about that, like having choice and optionality and not being forced into how I work each day is really important. And that's just one tiny bit of an example. There are so many others that people have come to rely on and expect of their employers as well. So I think what makes this moment unique really is the unique convergence of all these things happening simultaneously, right? Like in sort of years gone by, we may have seen 1 or 2 things happen at the same time, but for all of these things happening at the same time, it's a lot, and it's a lot for people to kind of get on board with and absorb. So it's not just about adapting to change, but it's actually about anticipating it and turning it into a competitive advantage. So I'm going to pause for a second because I've already said a ton, and hopefully it made some sense. But I would like to pose a first reflection question based off what I've shared so far. And that is, what is the single biggest change you've observed in your workplace over the last 12 months? So please share that in the chat. These are going to give us the sort of starting point for understanding how these broader trends are playing out in your organizations as well. And I'm going to take a sip of water as those come in. Pounds of applicants on any vacancy post. I couldn't agree more. It's actually crazy. The supply and demand is so off when it comes to applicants versus the number of job openings. Shifts to a skill-based landscape versus job-based. Yeah, Jessica, I completely agree. And I'll touch on that later. I think also the value of a degree relative to ongoing learning as well as part of that as well. Gen Z wanted to negotiate their schedule. What used to be accepted 9 to 5 is not acceptable for them. Yeah, I think we've definitely seen the rise of setting boundaries and work life, especially around work-life balance. In places like Europe, that's been going on for years, but now we've definitely seen that shift in other places like the US as well. People not very eager to return to the office after the pandemic. Yeah, and now some companies are basically saying we don't care in certain industries, we just want people back. And so they are limiting their talent pool as well by doing that. RTO mandates, employees are refusing. Yeah, absolutely. Business uncertainty, whiplash, and constant change in direction. Yeah, that's always one of my least favorite, especially when people say, hey, we're going one way, and you seem like you've charted a course, and then they're like, actually, we're switching direction. Tamanization and employees wanting a flexible hybrid schedule, the shift in people withdrawing due to their values, market changes towards, onshore and offshore. Millennials and Gen Z want to go straight to the top and not put the time in. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think there's definitely a difference in the way that I think maybe boomers and Gen X look at the workplace and sort of how they approach work to maybe earlier, newer generations coming into the workplace. Technology has forced us to change the structure of our company. Yeah, I totally agree on how we do work. And we're going to talk a little bit. I know there's been some questions about remote hybrid working as well. So I definitely do think it's not just a conflict between it, but also like still understanding the dynamics and how best to work around it too. So absolutely. Okay, well, these are all great. And I'm glad, like, the good news is the stuff that we're going to talk about very much correlates with this. So I'm glad to see that we're all headed and rowing in the same boat together on this as well. So let's go to the next slide. I think, hold on, is it? Can everyone see the slide? Looking a little big for me. I just want to make sure. Somebody just type in the chat if they can see the slide okay. I think. Let me just speak. Yeah, okay, perfect. Awesome. So let us start getting going onto the first trend. So I'm going to cover 7 trends on this as part of this discussion. And, I want to be very clear. These are just trends that I see that have particularly stood out. They're not indicative of every single trend that's out there right now. I think we've just highlighted a number that are existing, some of which I'll cover, but just keep that top of mind as we go through it. So I think the first major trend is the talent landscape. Somebody also already talked about, how many people apply for jobs at this point. But I think the narrative has really shifted from a couple of years ago when we were talking about like the Great Resignation in 2021 and 2022 to what I'm now calling strategic, or others are calling strategic mobility, right? So I think the economic uncertainty has created or changed the talent dynamics, but rather than reverting to pre-pandemic norms, we're seeing something new emerge. I also think the pendulum has swung, and we've gone back from a candidate-driven market to an employer-driven market again. The other thing I would say is, and some people started mentioning this in the chat, organizations are moving away from credential-based hiring to skills-based approaches. I think the why behind that is traditional credentials are increasingly actually seen as lagging indicators of capability in rapidly changing fields. So a lot of forward-thinking companies are actually now mapping their skills to their roles rather than degrees or years of experience. And that then opens up the talent pools that they may have previously overlooked. And I think that's huge. And I think that's also great for certain people who may have not necessarily had the degrees in the past, but they had a lot of relative work experience for a role as well. I also think we're seeing the rise of internal marketplaces, like platforms that make employees visible across the organization and match them to different projects and opportunities. I know I've come across companies like Unilever and Schneider Electric who've been like pioneers in this space. And they've actually reported as a result of those things, significant improvements in both employee retention and skill deployment as well. So I think recruitment has truly become borderless. We've seen that with global talent ecosystems emerging regardless of where your headquarters are. So it's not just about hiring remote workers, it's about tapping into a global talent pool, right? Whether that's full-time, whether that's project-based or partnership models. And we'll talk a little bit later about the different ways of working and building portfolio careers as well. And then I think finally, data-driven workforce planning is becoming essential in uncertain times. So the most sophisticated organizations, I think, are using scenario planning to prepare for multiple futures rather than linear projections. I think kind of to the question we asked at the very beginning, like how things have changed, evolved, and accelerated, we just don't know where we're headed. And so I think smart companies are getting ahead and creating a lot of different scenarios that could kind of play out in the future as well. So can we go to the next slide, actually? Okay, so what's working now, basically, I would say. So what's working now, I think, is a couple of things in this trend. So predictive analytics in recruiting is one thing. So companies are actually using AI to identify not just who might be the best fit, but also who has potential for future roles. So this shifts recruiting really from filling immediate vacancies to also thinking about talent pipelines in the future as well. I think the second thing is skills mapping for future-ready organizations. So this involves like identifying the skills your organization might need in, say, 3 to 5 years and creating those pathways to develop them internally. I think another thing that needs to be focused on is employee-led career pathing. I think for many of us who've been in the people in HR space for many years now, we're so used to the employer helps drive career pathing. But actually, I think a lot of the most effective organizations are now giving employees more agency in their career development, supported by tools that help them identify growth opportunities, which align with both organizational needs and personal interests as well. And then fourth is strategic upskilling and reskilling initiatives. I think about even, the last 1 or 2 in-house chief people officer roles I did, one of the core pillars that we had was upskilling. And so I just think leading companies are investing in targeted programs to really close those skill gaps that exist. And usually that can happen with specialized platforms or educational institutions, but I think that's really what's working now as well. So I want to do a quick reflection question here. I think there are a few that I could ask, though. So I'd say the one that I really want to ask is your organization really prepared to identify and develop future skills? And how effective is your current talent strategy in predicting and addressing emerging skill gaps? So I'm going to ask those 2 questions to start off with, and I know it's a long one. So is your organization prepared to identify and develop critical skill gaps? And how effective is your current talent strategy in predicting and addressing them? Okay. Not ready at all. Yeah, Rachel, not surprised to hear that. I might be, but the organization is not ready. Very small nonprofit hasn't had HR in 3 years. Current talent strategy doesn't really exist as there is no strategy. Okay. So Sarah, I guess it's a wait and see what impact you can have. They are just touching the surface and the problem is creating C-suite buy-in. Yep. I completely agree. And usually they need, it's surprising they need data to support the why behind having to do it and the investment behind it as well. Any other comments on this? I also think the other thing I would just add, something else that I've been seeing, and I don't know if others have, is I also think that we're not necessarily seeing as much external hiring, but more so people also trying to retain their existing employees, particularly if they have gone through restructuring or rifts or anything of that nature. I think they're trying to retain their employees versus bringing somebody that's an unknown entity off the street as well. Okay, well, I'm gonna, just in the interest of time, we go back to the second trend to talk about. So thank you, Kaylee. So the next trend that I really want to dive into is around workplace models being reimagined. So this one, I think a number of us have already kind of alluded to in here, but we've kind of moved beyond the sort of simple remote first in-office debate to, I think, more nuanced principles at this point. So the hybrid work models that I think emerged out of necessity during the pandemic have now basically matured into what I call intentional strategies. So the most effective organizations aren't focused on focused on where work happens, but on optimizing for the type of work being done, right? So I think this leads to activity-based workplace design, where we're basically seeing different environments, whether they're physical, digital, that are optimized for different types of work activities. I also think we've seen the rise in asynchronous collaboration becoming more and more important as teams work across time zones and schedules. So it's not just about having simple tools like Slack or Teams, but I think it's fundamentally about rethinking workflows and decision-making processes to basically reduce unnecessary real-time meetings. I also think that we're seeing an interesting tension between what I call culture-first workplaces, which emphasize in-person connection for culture building, versus work from anywhere approaches that prioritize individual flexibility. And I think the most successful organizations are going to be the ones that find their unique balance based on their specific needs and their culture as well. And I think finally, the role of physical office space continues to evolve, right? I think office spaces are being redesigned around collaboration, communication, connection, and experiences that can't be replicated virtually, but rather than individual work being done from anywhere. So on to the next slide. So I think what works now is a couple of things. I think performance, firstly, there's 4 kind of key practices that are happening. Performance measurement is in distributed teams. So organizations are really shifting from activity metrics to sort of outcome-based evaluation. So they're looking at the impact rather than the hours worked. I think secondly, there's more hybrid optimized communication protocols. So that means that people are being intentional about what communication happens in which channels, which conversations belong in email versus chat versus video calls versus in-person meetings. I know that many of us, we hate the meeting for meeting's sake type of scenario. So trying to be intentional about that. And then I would say third is location agnostic collaboration framework. So the most effective organizations, I think, have also created clear guidelines for collaboration that work regardless of where you're located, right? So I think having those frameworks is really helpful, especially when you think about meeting planning and coordination if you have a distributed team. And then I think fourth is designing for psychological safety across different spaces. So this could be like structured check-ins. This could be digital tools for anonymous feedback. This could be intentional space for social connection, both in remote and hybrid environments. So I think those are the things that are, or the practices that tend to be working and more successful organizations are actually implementing if they haven't already. So So I'm just going to do a quick reflection question for people on this one. And I know, because I know there's been quite a bit of interest on this topic already in the chat. So I guess my question is, how has your workplace model evolved since 2023, especially coming out of the pandemic? And are there any aspects of collaboration that have improved or deteriorated? So how has your workplace model evolved since 2023? And have any aspects either improved and or deteriorated? Feel free to put your comments in the chat. Being fully remote, capable since well before 2020, and we've proven the capability, but our leadership still does everything they can do to keep from allowing remote work. It is the exception, not the rule. Interesting, James. Yeah, I sadly have seen this as well firsthand. And it's disappointing when it shows up as well. We've got used to work remotely. People like that we learned how to evaluate based on results instead of spending time by the computer. Still 90% remote, 10 in the office. That's great, Victoria. Glad that you have a company that's still being committed to it, especially with a lot of people changing their perspectives on this. More requests from senior leaders to work on site versus remote. Interesting, yeah. We're definitely seeing that shift in particular industries like financial services and things of that nature. Our workplace collaboration become more active in remote setting. Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that, Queen. From big regional offices with fixed workplaces to smaller regional offices with open desk space. I like that. I've done that before too, Hilda. It sounds like a bit of a hub mentality that you might be creating there. And I think hubs can work very well for people if it works for their particular organization. 4% of the 10% are hybrid, and we have alternative work schedules too. Great. Okay, so it sounds like a mixed bag of many different things happening here. And again, I think it's going to be interesting to see whether a lot of companies stick to what they're doing, or again, whether that will continue to evolve with some of the other trends we're talking about, like AI and technology, and how invested they are in having actual physical office space as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next slide and the next trend. So, so basically the third trend I wanted to mention is the evolution of employee benefits and well-being. So this is a big one. I think we've obviously seen when we went into the pandemic, the rise of mental health issues, concern about well-being and how people would handle that. And I think that conversation has continued to evolve. So I think we've moved from benefits as perks to benefits as personalized experience. So I think the concept of well-being has expanded significantly to encompass mental, financial, physical, and social well-being. So leading organizations now recognize that these dimensions are interconnected and that supporting employees holistically leads to better outcomes than focusing on any single area. I'd say perhaps the most significant shift is towards personalization at scale. So one size fits all benefits packages have rapidly become obsolete as organizations recognize the diverse needs of their workforce. It just does not work at this point. And I think it goes back to the concept of flexibility and optionality that I touched on before. So this doesn't mean having to administer hundreds of different benefits, but it's more about creating flexible frameworks that allow employees to customize their benefits to their specific life situations and priorities, and or considering, and I think that will allow them, same with sort of spending patterns or things of that nature. I think the conversation has also shifted from work-life balance to work-life integration, which that reflects the reality for many at this point. The boundaries between work and personal life have become more fluid. requiring new approaches to supporting employees and managing their whole lives. And then one that I think is really important is, and I've seen it show up more and more, is caregiver support has really emerged as a business imperative, not just a nice to have benefit. So I think that includes support for children, elder care, and other family responsibilities that impact a significant portion of the workforce as well. So a quick reflection question here that I want to pose to folks. And I might do two, but the first one is AI-powered benefits personalization. Oh, sorry, what am I talking about? I've jumped ahead. Can I go to the next slide, actually? Yes, thank you. So what is working now? So I think there are 5 key approaches that are working now. So first, I would say is AI is playing a big role in this situation. So now there is benefits personalization using AI, and that helps employees navigate complex benefits and choose what's right for their specific situation. I think the second part is, and we've seen this a lot, is mental health support that goes beyond traditional EAP programs to include proactive resources, digital therapeutic options, destigmatizing access to care. And I think it even goes beyond some of these things, thinking about like grief support and training for people who have lost loved ones. I think there is the ability to go way beyond just what traditional EAP programs have done in the past. I think the third one is financial wellness, programs that really address the full spectrum of financial needs, particularly in an era where so many people have lost their jobs. We have a lot of economic uncertainty. So from day-to-day budgeting to long-term wealth building, it's become more and more to focus on that. And I think more and more people, even as earlier generations or newer generations of the workforce, are thinking about how do they save for retirement and build their wealth plan for the future as well. And then fourth, I would say, and something that I personally will speak to that I found valuable is sabbaticals and flexible time off models that recognize employee needs for significant recharging periods throughout their careers. So and I say this specifically, I had the privilege, because I know not everyone can do this, but in the second half of 2023, I took a sabbatical for personal and family reasons. And I think I came back to the workforce better for it. Now, I know that's not an option for everyone, but if it is an option for you or something that your company offers, I think that's also something that forward-thinking organizations are doing. And I think lastly is climate benefits and sustainability initiatives that align with employees' values and concerns about the environmental impact as well. So I'm going to do one quick question just here is how well do your current benefits address the diverse needs of your multi-generational workforce? Just pretty straightforward one. Again, we've got 5 different workforces currently, 5 different generations in the workforce right now. So how do they address them? Yes, Cheryl, we will be sending a copy of the presentation. No worries. Yeah, Rachel, could do better working on it. Yeah, I think that's common response right there. Extremely well, from retirement to plenty of time off. That's great, Denise. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. Well, sounds like for some of you, it's already very much happening and a work in progress, and for others, I'm seeing a few more come through. We do well because diversity is important. Expand more on sustainability benefits. Yeah, I think the big thing about that, it's always going to be a work in progress. You can always do better than what you're doing today. But it sounds like some of you are really on the front end of some of these things as well. So that's really great to hear. I love bike leasing. I love that as well. So, okay. Let's move on to our fourth trend then. So next up, not a surprise, one that I kind of led with in the beginning, but how technology is revolutionizing HR, right? So basically, this focuses on moving beyond simple automation to actually true augmentation of human capabilities. So I think AI has evolved significantly in the HR space in a very short period of time. I think early applications of it focused on transactional efficiency, sort of streamlining processes and reducing administrative burden. But today's applications are becoming increasingly strategic. They're supporting complex decision-making around talent, workforce planning, and the employee experience. So this evolution brings some important ethical considerations, though. As AI plays a greater role in leading decisions, questions around bias, transparency, and human oversight become critical. So, and these are going to be critical questions for HR teams to consider moving forward. So leading organizations are developing these kind of governance frameworks to ensure AI is used responsibly when it comes to HR contexts. So I also would say that employee experience platforms have emerged as the new center of the HR tech stack, integrating what was siloed systems in the past into these cohesive, collaborative digital experiences for employees. So they're connecting everything from onboarding to learning, performance, benefits, and communication in a seamless way. And I think those are particularly important for remote first companies where their whole experience is also very much focused on the digital footprint of a company. And then I would also say that HR analytics maturity has also increased significantly. So everything from reporting to predictive capabilities, as I mentioned with talent before, to forecasting retention risks, engagement trends, you name it. I mean, I am constantly amazed and approached by different companies to look at their products and services, particularly around AI, people analytics as well. And it's pretty eye-opening to see where we've already got to. So it's going to be interesting to see where we go. And then finally, all of this technology change now requires new digital competencies. So HR teams need professionals who are basically going to be able to understand both people and technology and how they can translate that between business needs, employee experience, and technical capabilities as well. So next slide. So what's working right now on this front? So conversational AI for employee support is one thing. Chatbots, virtual assistants, things of that nature as well. I'd say secondly, people analytics for retention and engagement. So data-driven insights that people are getting, which are helping organizations understand and address factors driving employee decisions. I'd say the third one is workflow automation for HR processes. So end-to-end automation of things like onboarding, transfers, separations, and creating more consistent experience while reducing any admin burden or time on there too. Digital coaching and development tools. So those are being used to scale personalized learning, micro-learning, and support to all leaders, not just senior leaders. And last but certainly not least, what I mentioned before, ethical frameworks for AI deployment that can establish clear guardrails for how AI will and won't be used in people decisions as well. So, quick reflection question I'm going to just ask is, what HR processes in your organization could benefit most from intelligent automation? What HR processes in your organization could benefit from intelligent automation? Yeah, I'm seeing some good comments and questions in the chat though too. So I also recommend, this is great for all of you to collaborate together if you've got any answers to some of the questions also coming through here. Okay, so Hilda, so payroll learning. onboarding and selection process, workflow automation, performance management, more onboarding as well. Returning from leave, HR chatbot, yep, where to find policies besides it's in the handbook, that's great. Data analysis, yep. Awesome, and performance, yeah, so it sounds like some of you or many of you, frankly, are already starting to use pieces of this. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how many more things we end up using within HR alongside AI, but also not losing sight of the human aspect of it for the reasons I said as well about bias, transparency, and the ethical pieces that come with it as well. All right, so with that, we're going to move to the fifth trend, which is not my favorite, I'm not going to lie. I think I mentioned that before, but is navigating a necessary one, compliance and regulatory change. So I think that basically things like pay transparency legislation have really expanded in recent years. You know, we have more and more jurisdictions requiring disclosure of salary ranges and pay practices. You know, and I think the intent of these laws is obviously positive, addressing any pay inequities, but implementing it has proven to be a real challenge for many companies, especially those operating across multiple jurisdictions with different requirements. I think, again, the AI regulation is an area of focus with new frameworks sort of developing around sort of accountability around the algorithm. So, you know, we just talked about how AI can be used in things like hiring and performance management or other people processes, which is requiring more scrutiny and potential regulation of these tools as well. Data privacy is becoming a huge piece. Organizations are collecting and analyzing more employee data. They've got to think about how they balance that with privacy considerations, again, depending on where you are. Requirements like GDPR, CCPA, a number of different things and their global equivalents. I think cross-border employment regulations have become more relevant. So organizations with distributed workforces need to navigate everything from employment contracts to tax implications across multiple jurisdictions. And then lastly, you know, workplace safety in hybrid environments raises new questions about employer responsibilities when employees are working from home or other remote locations as well. Not something you needed to necessarily think about, say, 5 or 6 years ago, but now kind of top of mind for people. Next slide. So what's working now as part of that? So I think there's 4 main approaches, again, that I think forward-thinking companies are focused on. Firstly, it's compliance technology and automation that can track regulatory changes, automate any required reporting, and alert HR teams of any potential compliance issues. I think the second one is agile regulatory response frameworks that really allow organizations to quickly adapt to new requirements without impacting any sort of day-to-day business operations. I think thirdly is proactive policy development that really anticipates regulatory trends rather than just reacting to new laws after they're passed. And then lastly, I would say employee-friendly compliance communications that translate a lot of things that are really complex requirements, but make them easy to understand and follow as well. So my one quick question here is, how do you stay informed about emerging regulations that may impact your workforce? How do you stay informed about emerging regulations that may impact your workforce? Well, thank you, Kimberly. It's very sweet of you. I didn't even have to pay you to say that. Mandatory compliance trainings, yep. Membership to multiple agencies, SHRM, webinars, HR newsletters, yep, HRIS. Provides some webinars, mandatory leadership trainings on compliance, webinars, LinkedIn, okay. Sounds like many of you are focused on many of the same things. So Be interesting, use mineral and think tank. Well, that sounds interesting. I didn't know enough about that. Okay, that's great. So I think, I think some of these other frameworks are going to be helpful as we move forward to actually create more efficiency, but also, again, keep the human element at play. Sorry, Hilda said also continuous alignment with DPO and country and group level. Okay, that's great. All right, moving on to the sixth and second last trend we're going to cover. Let me adjust. All right. So basically sorry, I just lost my way. So leadership development for today's workforce is obviously huge, right? And so I think a lot of hybrid leadership competencies have emerged as a distinct skill set. So leading effectively across physical and virtual environments has required sort of new approaches to communication, team building, and performance management. So leaders must also excel at leading through uncertainty and change. I also think inclusive leadership has moved from a nice to have to a competitive advantage. So leaders who can create environments where diverse perspectives are truly welcomed and leveraged really drive better outcomes. And then I say organizationally, we're seeing a shift from rigid hierarchies to network structures that enable faster information flow and sort of more agile responses to changes. So this requires leaders who can influence without traditional authority and collaborate across organizational boundaries. So it's not necessarily what your title is, but how you can basically influence and have people listen and follow your lead on things as well. And then I'd say finally, the role of people managers is really evolving from supervisors to coaches, with an sort of emphasis on developing talent rather than directing work. The next slide. So what's working for companies that are doing this and doing this well? I think firstly, distributed leadership models that spread leadership responsibilities across teams rather than in one role is a huge change and works well and creates collective accountability. I think making psychological safety an actual priority, not just something that's performative, and with an explicit focus on creating environments where people actually feel safe to speak, take risks, all those sorts of things, and learn from failing as well. I'd say thirdly is reverse mentoring programs that really prepare senior leaders with junior employees to build leaders' understanding of new perspectives, different technologies of ways of working, and really helps break some of those generational divides or differences as well. I'd say fourth is data-informed decision leadership development that uses analytics to really identify specific leadership behaviors that drive results in the organizational context. And then last but certainly not least is just-in-time leadership learning that delivers relevant development experiences at the moments that leaders need them. So real-time developmental experiences versus waiting a period of time where it's not as useful, like traditional programmatic approaches as well. So I am going to skip the reflection questions here just in the interest of time. But you will also be getting this presentation. So, so not to worry at all, you'll be able to see those as well. So the last trend that I wanted to touch on, and maybe not surprising, especially since I operate in the fractional space right now, is the rise of portfolio careers. So I'd say the traditional employment model is evolving. It's becoming way more fluid than the typical career paths that we've seen in the past. So we're seeing an evolution from gig work to more what I would say strategic portfolio careers. So fractional or gig work often is focused on flexible task-based outcomes. Portfolio careers kind of represent a more intentional approach to building diverse professional experiences that kind of complement and enforce each other. So, blending careers, combining sort of what I call full-time employment with side hustles are becoming increasingly more common and accepted. Organizations that kind of embrace this reality rather than fight it, I think will benefit from broader skills and perspectives long term as well. I think we're also seeing the rise of multi-skilled professionals who work across different boundaries and bring different expertise. I think this is particularly the case in areas with skills shortages where professionals can create more value and earn more by working with multiple organizations as well. I think internal talent marketplaces I touched on earlier are also helping shift things by enabling more project-based work as well within organizations. And then last but not least, I think also alumni networks. So they're kind of being reimagined as actually like strategic talent pools. So I think a lot of forward-thinking organizations are kind of thinking about things like boomerangs and maintaining meaningful connections with former employees as well, creating pathways for them to maybe do project work, mentoring, or returning in new roles as well. So what works now on the next slide? So as somebody that does this, I will say, firstly and foremost, fractional executive arrangements are happening that allow organizations to really access more senior level expertise without the cost of a full-time person, right? Which is particularly important for companies like startups, nonprofits, things of that nature, depending on their size and scale. I think more and more project-based employment contracts that clearly define deliverables, timelines, and compensation for specific initiatives rather than ongoing roles. Skills-based internal mobility platforms that make it easier for employees to contribute to projects is really important as well, outside of what their primary teams do. Career path flexibility is key. And then last and certainly not least is benefits and compensation models as well that are designed specifically for portfolio workers. So I think in those cases, they would address things like flexibility, skill development, and also, frankly, multiple income streams as well. So those are the full litany. But what I'd quickly like to do is, we go to the next slide, is how do you put this all together? So it's great that I've gone through these 7 different trends today, but how can you incorporate this into your HR roadmap, right? So a couple of quick things I just say to you are start with an impact assessment. So what that means is look at each trend based on its impact on your specific organization and the urgency of your response. So not every trend will be equally relevant for your organization. And then once you've assessed that impact, prioritize initiatives based on your organizational strategy. So depending on what your business strategy looks like, what are the greatest opportunities for HR to drive business outcomes, and which initiatives have the most significant impact on your critical talent segments as well? Those are the questions you really need to be answering. And also building internal advocacy for HR transformation is essential. You'll need leadership. I read it in the chat before. You need leadership buy-in. You need budget owners. You need employees to implement meaningful changes. So that really means translating HR initiatives into business outcomes that stakeholders actually care about as well. And I would say, as you implement your roadmap, focus on measuring what matters. So identify some key HR metrics that truly connect to business performance for your organization. And last but not least, come up with a time frame for yourself. If you are trying to go through transformational innovation, create a roadmap up to like an 18-month rolling roadmap. That way you have long enough to drive some meaningful change, but it's also short enough that you can make changes and it's agile as sort of market conditions and other things evolve as well. So I think that is pretty much everything. Just some key takeaways here. The talent landscape's fundamentally shifted. Workplace models have matured beyond location preferences to optimize for specific activities and outputs. We talked about the fact that benefits and well-being programs are moving towards personalization at scale. HR technology has shifted from automation to augmentation, right? So while efficiency is still important, Now we have to think about how we can enhance human capabilities rather than just replacing tasks. Regulatory requirements and complexity requires proactive, agile approaches. Effective leadership now requires excellence in managing distributed teams, navigating uncertainty, and leading, frankly, very diverse workforces. And last but not least, employment models are becoming more fluid, as I mentioned before. So the common thread here really is, to go to the last slide, is that all these trends in HR's role has evolved from administrative function to a strategic partner, which we already knew. But our focus is to drive agility and the employee experience. So I think this represents a challenge and an opportunity for HR professionals to evaluate their impact as well. So I think with the introduction of AI and anything else that's going to be coming our way in the future, we're just going to continue to have to be agile and continue to rethink how we do our work day in, day out. And with that, I'm going to take a breath and say thank you to all of you for listening to me for this length of time.
That was amazing. You definitely deserve to take a breath after that, Alex. That was great. I loved all of the insight from the chat. So thank you so much, everyone. Really quick, we had a couple questions, Q&A questions that came in before. We don't have much time, but I did have one that I wanted to ask you, Alex, if that was
Yep,
okay.
totally.
Asked, let's imagine you have a magic wand that enables you to open a portal to what business will look like in 2030. What are you excited to see and scared to experience?
It's
Probably
a
a
load of
lot.
Probably a lot. I can tell you what gets me excited. Let's start with the fun stuff. So I'm excited to see more businesses. I feel like, especially with newer generations, the focus on purpose is even bigger than it ever has been. So I think I'm excited to see more businesses that balance profit with purpose as well. If you think about companies like Patagonia, for example, I think that approach will be more commonplace. I think companies will also find better ways to measure their financial success and their positive impact, whether it's in communities or elsewhere as well. I'm also excited, I know a lot of people fear it, but truly about humans and AI working together in ways that actually make our work better and more creative as well. I think companies in 2030 won't just be using AI to cut costs. They'll be actually using it to help people think differently, how to solve problems in different ways, and to help create new and different opportunities for people as they develop new and different skills as well. And so I think that's going to lead to hopefully more collaboration as well. I will say what worries me is change happening too fast. There's so much happening so quickly, kind of going back to my question at the beginning of the session. So the pace of change keeps speeding up. And I just wonder if it's going to be more than people can handle by the time we get to 2030. There's only, everyone has change fatigue. I also think that the flip side of AI is that we don't have too many workplace decisions that are being made by algorithms. We need to make sure that we're reviewing these things, that there's ethical integrity around these decisions that we talked about as well. And I also worry about new kinds of workplace inequality, whether that could show up in the workplace as well. Because if people aren't getting access to the right technology and training, we may see gaps in the way that people have access to career opportunities as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that insight, Alex. I always like ending on like a future forward question, so I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us today. GoCo is the sponsor of today's webinar, and our goal is to try to automate those manual tasks that you deal with on a daily basis so that you have more time to put back into innovation, that future forward thinking, and of course, your people. And I can't talk about GoCo without talking about our incredible client success team. Each client of GoCo gets a dedicated client success team so that you can ask any and all questions about our HRIS too. And if you're interested to either learn more about GoCo or chat more with Alex, I'm going to pop up a poll just asking if you'd like to hear more from us. So feel free to select one or the other or both, and we will get back to you. And then with that, here are the SHRM and HRCI codes. I'm also going to share them in the chat as well. There we go. And I'll leave that up for just a minute. And with that, Alex, I so appreciate you taking the time today to chat with us. I'm going to end this poll, stop sharing my screen. There we go. Oh, well, a great session. I feel like we could have talked more than an hour on oh, Victoria, one of the best webinars this
Oh,
year.
thank you, Victoria.
That is amazing to hear. We are so lucky to work with Alex and other amazing speakers on these sessions. But Victoria, that is just so sweet. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And I hope that you have an incredible rest of your week. And we will chat with you next time. Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.